right now I see patriarchy being blamed as the reason, for everything terrible that's ever happened since the beginning of time. And allegedly the fix is just put women in power, or Black people in power, trans people in power. And what I'm pointing out is that patriarchy isn't men in charge. That is a symptom of patriarchy.
I am a husband, a father, a lawyer, a Christian, and a proud Canadian. I started this series because it was clear that our nation needs truth. Not just another biased narrative, but real information of substance. We need access to facts and the freedom to think for ourselves. I'm Leighton Grey, and this is Grey Matter.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Grey Matter. Well, have you ever stopped to think about the transformative power of words? Their ability to shape our reality, the way we think, the way we act, even things that seem to happen to us. Well, the guest who's on our program today has not only thought a lot about this, she's actually written a series of very compelling books about it. And her name is Dani Katz. Thanks for being on the program today, Dani.
Thanks for having me, Leighton. Honored to be here.
Great. So we're going to dive in. I'm going to introduce you properly and talk about at least a couple of your books, the ones that I've read so far. But before we do that, on our show, we have something called Framing Aphorisms. You'll appreciate this. And as I go through these, you'll appreciate that I actually read your books. The first one is from someone named Buckminster Fuller, who wrote, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Next one is from someone named Ludwig Wittgenstein, who wrote that the aspects of things that are most important for us are hidden because of their simplicity and familiarity. One is unable to notice something because it is always before one's eyes. And finally, a bit of a funny one from a man named James Nichol, who wrote, "The problem with defending the purity of the English language is that English is about as pure as a crib house whore. We don't just borrow words. On occasion, English has pursued other languages down alleyways to beat them unconscious and rifle their pockets for new vocabulary." So who do we have on the show today? Well, Dani Katz. Dani is described as equal parts thought leader, trailblazer, and word wizard. Dani is a catalyst for evolution. Whether writing, teaching, coaching, or podcasting, Dani is a fierce, heart-centered cheerleader for humanity's freedom, empowerment, and win-win solutioning. A visionary thinker with an uber-expanded perspective, Dani has devoted her career to empowering leaders, disruptors, and rebel badasses with the tools, skills, and confidence necessary to thrive as conscious reality creators. She's described here as the most dangerous woman on the internet, and she is on the internet. She has a podcast too. But in addition to coaching, consulting, teaching, and speaking, Dani is also the best-selling author of The Language of Betterarchy. This is her most recent book, A Blueprint for Uniting Against Tyranny. And also she's written Word Up, Little Languaging Hacks for Big Change, and Pop Propaganda, an illustrated guide. She's also written some other books, including one called Spirit Hacking, which was a #1 bestseller, which she wrote for Shaman Durek. She describes herself as a lifelong learner with an unquenchable thirst for capital T truth. So, Dani, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I love the quotes that you picked. Super spot on.
Well, obviously, this is something that is part of your writing. I noticed that there were a lot of quotations in your books. And I want to start off by saying I really enjoyed certain aspects of your book, especially the way that you describe the transformative power of words. I really appreciate that, and this is something that we don't pay enough attention to. The other thing that I found really interesting is the way that you described the way that words are being used to tyrannize us and to pit us against each other in an almost an imperceptible way. And this is a theme not only in Word Up, but also, I guess, more in Betterarchy. Maybe this is wrong, and I'd be interested to get your take on this, but I sort of see Word Up, I see Betterarchy as sort of taking Word Up in a lot of ways to another level. Is that a fair way to understand the way you structured these books?
Yes, it's spot on. I wrote Word Up, Little Languaging Hacks for Big Change was intended more for personal transformation. And the Language of Betterarchy is taking that body of work and using it for societal transformation.
Yeah. One of the things that I found really compelling about the book also is you've probably put together one of the best explanations of feminism, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But also you speak specifically about how feminism has, by inadvertence or by design, sort of produced generations of weak, ineffectual, confused, and somewhat useless men. And this is something that I happen to think is not talked about enough. It's a real tragedy because all these useless men, are not making women very happy these days. So was that part of the message too, to sort of attack some of these paradigms, some of these ways of thinking that are sort of tied up with woke, we call it woke thinking, progressive thinking, to sort of attack those. Obviously, you talk a lot about in the book about how, let's say, the left, I know that's not a word you like to use, really weaponizes words against us and sort of turns us against each other. But was this part of the idea that is to make it an attack on tyranny and to get us turning towards a better way of thinking and living?
It's definitely intentional to illuminate the tyranny, to illuminate the separation. Because you've read my books, I'm sure you understand my reticence to embrace the term attack, right? Because any sort of
Right.
oppositional energy is only going to seed
Yeah.
violence, when
Yeah.
my aim is to foster understanding and collective win-win solutions. So it was absolutely my intention to illuminate this issue. And to be fair, at the same time that the feminist movements have given us weak, ineffectual men, it's given us overly masculinized, aggressive women.
Hmm.
We live in a realm of equal and opposite forces. So if the masculine is out of balance, then so too is the feminine. And
Hmm.
especially the past few years, I see all this emphasis going on attacking the men for where they're out of balance. And I don't really see the feminine taking responsibility for where we can shift and where we're out of alignment. And, I really use the masculine feminine as a basis for the rest of the book. That's why it's part one, because right now I see patriarchy being blamed as the reason, for everything terrible that's ever happened since the beginning of time. And allegedly the fix is just put women in power, or
Right.
Black people in power, trans people
Right.
in power. And what I'm pointing out is that patriarchy isn't men in charge. That is a symptom of patriarchy. But patriarchy is actually a lens of perception. And it's a
Hmm.
way that we've put guardrails around our mind and our meaning making mechanisms. It's really limiting our perspective. And so,
Hmm.
from my perspective, the imbalance between the masculine and feminine is expressed through, men in charge, women feeling disempowered. But the true nexus point of the distortion comes in the demonization of emotion, intuition, of a means of a way of dividing, shaming, blaming, like even attacking a problem, right? That's going to be a capital M masculine
Right.
way of doing it. And when I talk about masculine and feminine, I'm talking about the hermetic principle of gender. I'm not talking about embodied men and women, because I know
Right.
people can get their panties in a bunch around that. But it's helping us understand where we are using an imbalanced language, where we are using a language that is reliant upon masculine shadows. We're not going to
Hmm.
get balanced solutions from an imbalanced language. So, yes, it
Right.
was very deliberate. And I appreciate that translated and
Yeah.
that you picked up on that.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about as I was reading, you talk a lot about hierarchies
Yes.
and the harm that they cause. And maybe I had this wrong, but you seem to be fairly clear about stating that hierarchies are a social construct. And I found that very interesting because I had read not so long ago sort of a different take on that. It was in a book by Dr. Jordan Peterson, you probably know as a very well-known Canadian public intellectual. And in a book called 12 Rules for Life, he talks about, and this is somewhat famous now, at least in Canada, about the lobsters.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a different take on hierarchies. He says that actually these hierarchies are biological, that we're hardwired, they're endemic. And he uses the examples of lobsters and monkeys and rats and all sorts of different examples in nature, and says that actually these hierarchies are part of who we are, how we relate to each other. That they're not social constructs. They are socially expressed, and that's the harm that they cause.
Mhm.
How would you respond to Dr. Peterson's take on hierarchies versus hierarchies being a pure social construct?
So from my perspective, it's both. And this was actually something that I wrestled with in writing the book. And I had conversations with other, thinkers and teachers with whom I respect, where my confusion was like, how am I to take down the social construct of hierarchy when there is natural hierarchy? That is
Right.
real. Like
Yeah.
the tiger is going to eat the bunny every time. It's
Yeah.
a faster runner. It's a more effective predator. What I see happening in terms of the social imposition of hierarchy is we place value judgments. So I don't
Mm.
think that source or whatever intelligence that is running this realm values the tiger more than the bunny. I don't think that that entity would say that tigers are more valuable than the bunny. We all serve different functions.
Mhm.
So, what I'm tackling in my book is this imposed, socially engineered hierarchy that has us buying into the fiction that we need there to be losers in our culture for there to be winners.
Mhm.
Regarding Jordan Peterson, because I very much respect his work, I'm a fan, I've seen him speak. I mostly love his take on defending the linguistic territory.
Right. Yeah.
That being said, if you're familiar with Claire Graves' work in spiral dynamics, I think that Jordan Peterson is somewhat blinded from a kind of blue level authoritative worldview. He's very much aligned with traditional values and structure. And I would
Yes.
venture to say he loves hierarchy. And that's beautiful. I'm speaking from a different lens of perception.
I see. Interesting. Talking about words, though, like sort of getting back to first principles, if we can, and maybe talking a little bit about word up. Uh, Obviously, you've been a wordsmith. You're a journalist, or you have been a journalist. I expect you still are, obviously, with your podcast. But what was your inspiration, your motivation for producing Word Up, for writing that book? Obviously, a very unusual book, for starters.
Yes, I mean this whole realm of languaging that I'm sharing is kind of odd, right? It's something new for our culture.
Yeah.
So I had clued into the coding and language around 2007, and I'd read a book by a man named R. Neville Johnson. He was shot point blank in the chest, and he died for a few minutes. And
Mm.
while he was dead, he downloaded these languaging codes. And after I read the book, I couldn't not see them. And as a journalist who was working with words all day, every day, it just pulled me into this multidimensional conversation where I just started to see how words were programming me and programming people around me. And at the time, I was
Interesting.
writing for the LA Weekly, and I was what they called their Nutter Butter writer. So my beat was consciousness, spirituality. And I remember going to it was an event that a very famous kind of thought leader was doing, and I watched the words come out of her mouth and program and disempower the audience. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy that I'm seeing this, and understanding that that wasn't the speaker's intention, but that's what was happening through the limitation coding coming through her languaging. So I started to play with the language codes for myself. And as someone who's been walking a transformational path for my adult life, I had tried, so many different modalities and plant medicines and this therapist and this, meditation technique and, this 10-day meditation retreat and all of these things. But nothing was as transformative as changing my own languaging patterns
Mm.
and cluing into, what were the thought forms that I was looping on throughout the day? And how was I telling my stories to other people? And basically, how was I painting myself into cages formed of disempowerment and scarcity? And so after seeing how transformative this languaging paradigm was in my own life, as well as in my friends' lives, I was invited by a spiritual publisher to write a book about it. And the book I had actually downloaded years before. It came through in like 2 days. I was living in Santa Fe, and this just body of work kind of dropped in. And I wrote about it, and it had been sitting in a hard drive, and I kind of forgot about it because I was still in my journalism mindset, and I was
Mhm.
just writing articles and whatnot. But when this publisher approached me, I said, well, I already have the book. And it was fun, I always love tweaking, like the putting down the bones is the heavy lifting, but then the like playing and tweaking and fine tuning is the fun part for me. And I was delighted by how well that book has done and the consistently positive feedback I get from people about how supportive and transformative it has been for them.
Mm-hmm. Part of what you talk about in Word Up and also in Betterarchy is the way that words shape reality. They shape the way we see ourselves, the way we relate to others, the way we relate to the world. And so that's part of the focus. There is I guess an implied self-improvement approach here, but my sense of Word Up is that it's sort of a personal word makeover, and then Betterarchy sort of takes that out into the social context in terms of making people understand, well, how can word power, the way that I use words, improve the way that I relate to others to live peacefully and harmoniously with other people. Was that sort of do I have that the relationship between the two books accurate, or am I off the mark?
No, you're on the mark. The only thing I would add to the language of Betterarchy is helping people understand our responsibility in creating our world. We all of us are responsible for sustaining this outdated structure, whether we're in, government or elected positions or not, because this reality construct is forged of our thoughts, words, and actions. Right. And we are responsible for all the input that we're putting into the morphogenetic field into our world. So the point for this book was to help people understand how we are responsible for our world, but also to empower people with tools to change our world. I think a lot of us can see that the world is messed up, that we're teetering off of a very dangerous edge. And I also think a lot of us can be overwhelmed by how messed up things are. How many systems are inviting an overhaul? And so many of us, through generations of indoctrination, can feel powerless, right? And that's very deliberate. The social engineers want us to feel powerless. And so this book is to rewrite that fiction and to let people know and really grok and understand how we are all reality creators, and every word we are speaking is contributing to how this reality is forged, and for giving people a set of tools to change this reality so that we're not sitting around waiting for some knight on a white horse to be installed in the Oval Office and fix things for us, but instead for us to take responsibility now and do what we can to start changing our world now.
So this is the second part of the title, which is a blueprint for uniting against tyranny. So let's talk a little bit about this tyranny. You elucidate this in the book. What exactly is the tyranny that you're talking about in your book?
Well, I think the tyranny has a number of different faces and tendrils, right? So, I think one of the more obvious tyrannies is divide and conquer, right? And the extent to which the social engineers are going to try to convince us that we're separate, that we're not all human, that we're not all deserving of love, respect, empathy, a seat at the table, a voice, et cetera, et cetera. That's one of the more obvious ones. We can also see the tyranny in the civil liberties grab, in the attempt to police and control speech, right? But I think if we're going to go down to root causes, which is generally how I'm wired, let's get to root causes and solutions, as quickly as possible. I think the primary cause is this misunderstanding of what authority is, and how we have been indoctrinated to believe that authority is something that lies outside of us, that it is an entity or an organization that has the right to tell us what to do. And when we look to the etymology of authority, we can see that authority is in fact an inside job. Authority comes from the Latin word auctor, which means founder, builder, or one who causes to grow. But we don't have to overthink it. We look to the word authority, it has the word author in it. To me, it's the divine right to write our stories however we choose. And so this is, again, a tool to help us write better, more empowering, unifying, beautiful, life-affirming stories for ourselves. And I think, we can put as many patches over the issue as possible, but until we understand our own sovereign authority, and until we stand in our own agency and empowerment, that we have every right to determine the direction this earth goes to. No one has more right than any one of us. And I think most of us, the majority of us, want win-win solutions that serve the greatest good of all. So this is helping us, rewrite that fiction and understand that we have the authority to steer our Earthship onto safer, saner territory. And this is a tool for us to do just that.
That concept of authority, I recall that distinctly from your book. And that really struck me, because as a Christian, it got me thinking about, how the universe was created. And, in the book of Genesis, it's interesting, God spoke the universe into existence. He used words and so for those of us who are, of the Judeo-Christian tradition, let's say, or worldview, this makes a lot of sense. It fits right in line with the idea of us being creators, being authors of our own lives. And so that part of it really, really struck me. And you're quite right. And I believe you talk about this a little bit in the book, that the more we start to author our own lives, the better we become at making effective decisions. And the better decision makers we become, we tend to have more fulfilling, happier, more harmonious lives, and we have less conflict with others. So that part of your book actually really, really spoke to me. I want to sort of hit you with a real life example. I want to get your take on this. As you know, the Claudine Gay situation has been very much in the news recently. And when this came up, I thought about it in the context of your books, because a lot of this, in terms of plagiarism, racism, things like that you talk about in the book, were really sort of played out in real time in that situation. So what's your take on that Claudine Gay situation, in the context of, let's say, the betterarchy? Can you provide sort of a real world interpretation or application of the principles in the book to that situation for our viewers and listeners?
I can, and I'm going to offer a caveat. As well as I just want to say, it's so validating to hear from someone who does identify as a Christian that resonated, because as someone who's not religious, that passage of the Bible has had such a profound effect on me. So I'm very happy to know that translated in terms of understanding language as reality creation technology.
Yeah.
So my caveat for is it Claudine Gay? Is that her name?
Yes. This lady who was the president of Harvard and got into some trouble. Yeah.
So the caveat I want to offer, because I not only write and teach about language, but I also write and teach about propaganda, is it's a giant distraction, and the fact that there's even any controversy over this, to me, is indicative of how successful the propaganda machine is.
Interesting.
In terms of getting us talking about something that is so obvious. So I think it's twofold. The fact that we're even discussing whether it's okay to plagiarize is insane to me, right? To not give people credit, and especially in an academic institution like Harvard, we're not talking some podunk community college. We know that the backbone of academia is to cite our sources. We all know this. And then to make the claim that to be called out for this lack of integrity is racism speaks to what you were saying about my work in terms of how language programs our minds, and it programs how we perceive reality, right? So if I'm operating with a victim mindset that says, I'm not going to get a fair shake in the world because I'm Black, or because I'm a woman, or because I'm Jewish, or, whatever it is, then that is going to shape my lens of perception, right? So let's pick something totally neutral. Let's say it's because I'm a woman, right? Now I'm going to take anything that I deem as an affront, and I'm going to try to plug that into this sexism mindset, because I'm operating with a belief system that is programming me to think that I'm never going to get a fair shake because the world hates women, right? So it's just backing it into this corner that is this limiting belief, or this victim story that I've written for myself. And I see this happening more and more on the woman front. There were various, congressional hearings I've seen in the past couple weeks. And it's can a woman not speak on this floor? Can a woman not be heard on this floor? And it's very frustrating because it's so disempowering and it detracts and distracts from the actual issues at hand, which is really the point of all these victim narratives. It's like, well, let's not talk about what we really need to be talking about as a culture, and instead just avoid the conversation so we don't hurt someone's feelings who's playing the victim card.
Getting back to this concept of the betterarchy, I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate with you here, just for the purposes of
I love it.
having a stimulating conversation, which is something that you actually say in your book, that if you're actually living out the betterarchy, you can talk about anything and not have conflict.
Yes.
So on one view of the matter, the betterarchy presents as a sort of way of getting people to understand perhaps a new sort of moral code, a secular one, certainly humanist. You call yourself a humanist in your book.
How are you defining humanist? I'm just curious because
that's one of my that's actually where I want to go with you. Because I'm more interested in how you define it, because
great
humanistic attempts, and you know what these are, to sort of prescribe a new moral code for mankind, humankind, have not been very effective. Think of Rousseau's social contract. You think of, for example, Hume's, the pleasing sentiment of approbation, or Kant's categorical imperative. To my mind, all of these have failed, and they failed miserably. In fact, I think they've, in some ways, the secular humanism, classical secular humanism, has really compounded the problem and was a precursor of the wokeism that we're living through today. And so my question for you is, when you use that word humanist, and how are you defining that? What do you mean when you say that you're a humanist?
I'm so glad that you're asking me this, and I'm so glad that the conversation is taking this direction, because we're clearly using two different definitions of humanism, right? And this is also like one of the keys in betterarchy as well as in Word Up, is let's define our terms, because so often we're arguing over things and we're not talking about the same thing. So I'm a deeply spiritual person. I absolutely believe in a higher power. I'm using humanism as a means of rewriting these concepts of sexism or racism, and using it as a means of getting away from the anti, and moving us into pro, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I'm using it in a very simple way of, I'm for the good of humanity and not all these like weird divisions. But no part of my own personal definition of humanism is aligning itself with atheism. And I agree with you. I don't think we would have gotten here if the social engineers hadn't pulled God or the notion of a higher power away from the populace.
Yes. One of the problems I think that those theories, the ones that I mentioned, suffer from, Rousseau is, I think the classical example is this, what I think is a mistaken presumption that human beings are essentially good. Not only is there really a paucity of evidence that that's true, in fact, all the evidence is in the other direction. I'm speaking as somebody who's spent a lot of time in courts and criminal courts. People are not essentially good, and I don't think, and I'm interested to get your take on this. I don't think that we can change our behavior or change our environmental conditions in order to make us good. I think that has to come from another source. I'm interested to get your take on that.
It's interesting because I've been wrestling with this the past year myself. I at my core am animated by idealistic tendencies, and I just know myself well enough that I'm not going to get away from that. I do believe that humans are fundamentally good. Now, there are some bad apples, of course.
Yeah.
But my perspective, and whether it's going to work in my lifetime or not, is to speak to people's highest selves and to give them the benefit of the doubt and to hold them in their highest potential and my belief in their highest potential, and to trust that that's going to encourage them to meet that vibration. Am I disappointed by people in that all the time? But I also know that we've been co-opted as a humanity, and we've been co-opted by dark forces that have done us a disservice. So I'm kind of on the fence as to whether we're truly not all good, or because of the co-opting and the indoctrination, people have been steered away from their inherent goodness. And I'm working
Right.
this out for myself right now as I learn more and more discernment, and at the same time hold people to their highest, because I also have been pleasantly surprised in doing that.
Right.
It's tricky. It's very tricky.
Yeah. Well, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just interested, having read your books, what your thoughts are about this. Speaking from the Judeo-Christian perspective, those of us who are Christians, speaking of words, in the Gospel of John, it says that the Word was made flesh and walked among us. And so that's really taking this idea of creation and the Word to its ultimate level. And what I mean by ultimate level is I mean the transcendent. And this is something that you seem to talk around in your books, but I'm interested to know, because you talk a lot about in your books about how the use of language and changing the way that we use it can improve our lives, our daily lives. For example, in terms of getting some of the things that we want, making us feel better about who we are, getting along with other people. But there isn't a lot of discussion in your books about the transcendent. And I'm interested to know why that is.
Would you mind unpacking a little bit what you mean by that?
What I mean by transcendent is what transcends this life, a human existence. We're born, we live for a while, we have conversations on a podcast, and then at some point, we all die. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But there's something that and you talked about spirituality. In the Christian faith, we believe that actually this life is a preparation for the next. And so actually that is, for example, taking the Bible, for example, or the gospel, which I guess for Christians would be an example of betterarchy. We live by that because we see those words as the living word of God that transforms us and actually transcends human existence.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the highest form of this is John 3:16. For God, God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, so that whoever believeth in him shall have eternal life. So I don't want to get too far down the road with the religious discussion, but I'm interested to know about how betterarchy sort of fits in with, for example, people like me who have a Christian worldview, or do you have some thoughts about that?
I do, and I love these questions. I really appreciate how thoughtful these questions are. So, with betterarchy specifically, I'm aiming for as wide an audience as possible, right?
Right.
So I'm doing my best in my, with my cheeky way of being as inclusive as possible of all
Yes,
worldviews and
I see.
cosmologies in the conversation. That being said, I think the fixity section actually really speaks to what you're talking about, because the language of betterarchy is speaking to an ever unfolding journey, right? It's why I don't acknowledge the concept of failure. Maybe what appears to be failure in this lifetime is still prepping me and teaching me for the next, or the next, or the next, or the next. It's
Right.
why so much of, that section specifically is aiming to eradicate these notions of fixity and move us into a more eternal unfolding beyond just this realm. So it's why a lot of the languaging hacks or upgrades are aspirational, right? It's like, okay, so may not have, mastered hop keto now. I'm still learning. I'm still mastering.
Right.
So it's inviting us to not put boundaries or guardrails on things that we haven't yet achieved or don't think we can do, and to open that up. It also speaks to the languaging upgrades around never and always, right?
Right.
And trusting that, like, if I say, my relationships never work out, in my languaging paradigm, I'm seeding multiple lifetimes with that thought form. and teaching people, hey, just because something has happened multiple times in the past, let's open ourselves up to the potentiality that exists in our eternal lifetimes and earth walks. So
Right.
I believe that the transcendent is there. I'm just not naming it specifically. It's more
Right.
subtle.
You don't want to get you don't want to, let's say, alienate some people who don't have a particular religious viewpoint. I understand that. As a Christian, this betterarchy though makes a lot of sense to me, because those of us who are Christians, we essentially live by the Lord's second commandment, which is, love thy neighbor. And, that's not very far off from what you're trying to get at in betterarchy, is it?
No, it's spot on, because it's acknowledging our humanity, our shared humanity, and maintaining the respect and compassion for that, even if we vote differently, think differently, relate differently. I'm inviting
Right.
us to always, always honor our shared humanity and not let differences in belief, in behavior, inspire us to remove that or to disrespect that or to cut people out of our community because of those things.
Right. So, turning away from your books just for a moment, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about some of your other activities. I noticed from visiting your website that you're also involved in something called quantum languaging and consulting. Would you mind explaining a little bit about that work and what you actually do for people?
Yes. So the language of betterarchy is kind of a subset of quantum languaging. Quantum languaging is the umbrella term I use for this languaging paradigm that I'm sharing, wherein we're learning how language functions as reality creation technology and
Right.
consciously and deliberately implementing it into our individual lexicons. So
Hmm.
as a quantum languaging coach and consultant, I'm looking at people's individual languaging habits, right? Like, it's one thing to read my books, to take my courses. It's different to have my ears on your individual languaging patterns. Or when I'm consulting with organizations, to have me in the organization and observing the meetings, observing the culture, and seeing what are the languaging patterns that are sabotaging the mission, that are
Interesting.
slowing down
Hmm.
productivity, that are contributing to inefficiency or to infighting amongst team members. So I'm looking at the very specific languaging habits. And then with the clients that I'm coaching and those who I'm consulting who are willing to go deeper, going deep into the belief systems that are informing the languaging habits and seeing, like, where was the trauma, or the confusion that inspired this erroneous belief system that is therefore informing these languaging habits, right? So very
Hmm.
simply, like, if, if there's a scarcity, mentality, if somewhere along the way I decided that money was evil and that, only evil people are wealthy, that thought form, that belief structure is going to inform the scarcity languaging patterns. So part of
Hmm.
my work is using the languaging patterns to hone in on the deeper issues,
Hmm.
healing and integrating the deeper issues, then rewriting the stories. And then from there, the languaging upgrades are really easy to implement. And then that's when we see everything change. If
Hmm.
I were to use, like, if at a fundamental level, I thought that only evil people had a lot of money, it wouldn't matter how often I said money comes to me easily and often if that is in direct conflict with an underlying belief system.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And actually, again, this is another area where what you wrote really spoke to me. This idea of that we live in a universe of abundancy, because that happens to be a very biblical idea. That's very much part of Western culture, and of course, the idea of scarcity, and you quite rightly point out, leads us down so many very, very dangerous paths. And what you're describing is almost the antithesis of diversity, inclusion, equity training that's going on all over the place. I would think that if you were running your webinars and your seminars at Fortune 500 companies, we wouldn't have as many Claudine Gay situations. But you do offer this language of sovereign authority webinar as well, right?
Yes. That's one of my favorites. And that was actually a precursor. Like it covers pretty much all of the material in the language of sovereign authority is covered in the language of betterarchy. And I created that program when they were doing the pandemic and we were under really hard lockdown here in New Mexico. Right. And I was watching the people around me disempower themselves in the face of what was going on. And so I created this program as a way for people to maintain their empowerment and to maintain their sovereign agency, even if they were choosing to go along with certain mandates and dictates, and explaining to people that, like, you could choose to cover your face if you decide to, and still maintain your sovereign authority and your agency if you're framing it in the right way, and helping people get through this while staying connected to their empowerment and their agency. That it's such a great one. I highly recommend that program.
Yeah. What about another one that you offer is called The Language of Healing? How is that one different than the other webinar that you offer?
Yeah, so The Language of Healing also came out. I had been playing with it myself pre-pandemic, but when people started getting the injections, some young women in our community here were being diagnosed with cancer. Very, very young. And so as my means of giving back, I was offering these sessions to people who are getting these diagnoses to help them start programming their bodies for accelerated healing. So the quantum languaging paradigm acknowledges that every word we speak is programming our bodies at all times. So if we're dealing with a health challenge, it's very helpful to be mindful. Am I programming my body for more sickness? Am I programming my body to drag this out? Or am I programming my body by the way that I'm telling other people and myself around this challenge? Am I programming my body for accelerated healing? So it's helping people frame these healing initiations in such a way that they can accelerate their healing as quickly as possible. And have full and complete recovery. So for anyone who's dealing with any sort of health challenge, it's really helpful because, yes, we can be telling ourselves the most positive stories about how quickly we're overcoming, but we could be using certain words and telling people in our lives about what we're dealing with that will reflect back to us more sickness, a more drawn out healing process. So it's also cluing into how do we want to talk to people about it? And also understanding that the Western medical paradigm is based on giving us worst case scenarios, right? Because their primary aim is not for us to get well, it's for them to not get sued. And us getting well is second. So they're always going to be covering their own butts by giving us worst case scenarios so we don't sue them. And it's very important for us to not swallow and embrace those narratives. It's not to create conflict with the doctors, but it's to learn how to rewrite what they're telling us so that we can heal and we can be the exceptions rather than their rules.
I suppose Shakespeare was right when he wrote "Kill all the lawyers first." Anyway, let's let's talk about your Word Up podcast. This is something you've been doing for a while now. You're pretty early to the podcast game, weren't you? So how did the podcast get started?
So the podcast got started. Increasing censorship in the journalism landscape was making it harder and harder for me to do what I'm trained to do and what I love to do. And so in my research, podcasts are, podcasts are the least censored, and hopefully, that will continue. So I started, it was actually a completely different concept for a podcast that I was going to be doing with a friend of mine. And circumstances had him dropping out at the very last minute. So I just thought, okay, well, I love talking to people. I'll do an interview format and put these podcasts out. For me, I'm a pretty extreme introvert. I like a lot of alone time, like a crazy amount of alone time. So it's very healthy and nourishing for me to have deep exploratory conversations at least once a week. And as a journalist, I'm always looking for the novelty. I'm looking for the new thing. Like, where has the person I'm talking with not gone yet? I sense something similar with you, I
Oh,
want to take
great.
them someplace where they haven't been, so that,
Right.
the idea of discovery and novelty really drives the conversations that I share. My show was just picked up by Progressive Radio Network, which
Oh,
is,
wonderful.
thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. That just happened. And so I'm now in the process of folding in more quantum languaging shows with the interviews, so that I could also be using the opportunity to help people get a deeper understanding of my work, in addition to showcasing other people's works and having really cool conversations.
So you're going to spend a lot more time working on your podcast and maybe less time writing interesting books. That's a shame, but I'm sure that your podcast will enjoy continued success.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
One book that we haven't talked about, actually a couple of them, and that I'm going to ask you to maybe comment on. One is, and I haven't read these two. I really enjoyed Word Up and Betterarchy, but one is called Pop Propaganda, an Illustrated Guide. Is this the one that you talked about, where you said that you basically wrote it over a 2-day period?
No. So the bulk of Word Up dropped in over a 2-day period, but I did write Pop Propaganda really quickly. I wrote it in 3 weeks. I have it right here. Yeah, this is it. And so during hard lockdown, I was invited by a homeschool collective in New York to teach their teens. And this was right at the time when Biden was installed in the Oval Office. And I had
installed.
I had spent the bulk of my career since 2001 trying to stop what's happening now. At the time, I was producing the news for Pacifica Radio. That's when I clued into Project for a New American Century, started to educate myself, Club of Rome, the Globalist Agenda. And so my whole aim was to stop what's happening now. When they installed Biden, I realized, okay, it's happening. Like, the people have made their choice. I was not successful in staving that off. So let me turn my attention to the youth so that this never happens again.
Right.
So my first class that I taught the homeschoolers was about propaganda and media literacy and learning to safeguard their critical thinking. And I was using the Bernays book as our textbook, which is a great book, but not fun for teenagers. So I got hit with the bioweapon that they call FOVID right when I finished teaching that class. And as I was down, I was like, well, let me use this opportunity to create a textbook for propaganda that's more fun for teens to read. So I busted out the Pop Propaganda book, which features 37 tools, tricks, and techniques the social engineers use to try to propagandize us. And it's very much like a magic trick. Like, once we know the tricks they're using, they don't work on us anymore.
Interesting.
So I feel like it's really important for teens and grownups to educate ourselves as to how propaganda works, because we're all susceptible. I'm still susceptible. They're capitalizing upon our weaknesses. And what's happening right now is absolutely a war of words and a war of thought. Like, right now, we don't have a ground war. We're not being attacked with bullets and missiles and tanks. We're being attacked with propaganda and words. And so this is a way for people to understand how and why that's happening. And I just am in the process, it'll be done in a week, of digitizing my pop propaganda course so that people can take it without needing me to teach it in real time.
Really?
So I'm very excited for that to get out, because I think it'll really do a lot in helping us, again, take our power back, come together and course correct and create a different game.
So this propaganda, in a real sense, is the antithesis of the type of authorship that you write about and that you try and teach people to do. So I could see where you would have sort of an innate understanding of propaganda and how it works. And we've talked a lot about that on this program, actually. Another book that you've written is called Yes, I Am. You want to talk about that one a little bit? I haven't had the chance to read this one. it looks like it might be aimed at younger children. Is that correct?
So Yes, I Am is a transformational coloring book for kiddos,
Okay.
grown-ups, and everyone in between. And it started as a calendar. So years ago, I realized that our holidays in this country are really just days to not go to the bank, not go to the post office, and not go to work. But we're not actively invoking the energies of whatever we're celebrating. Our
Right.
culture is missing that, and I think it's doing us a disservice. So I created my own calendar called the Yes, I Am calendar. And I created new holidays for people who I saw as beautiful thought leaders, people who changed our culture for the better. So Krishnamurti, Hypatia, Ayn Rand, Tom Robbins, David Bowie, I was just having fun. And then each kind of the 12 calendar pages would be a positive affirmation, like I am confidence. And when I draw, people don't know this because, I'm an illustrator as well. My drawings are teeny tiny. They're very, very small because I think I've always been obsessed with like saving paper and not wanting to clear cut forests. So, ever since I was little, I was trying to fit as much as I could on one page. So for the calendar, like say it was the I Am Confidence page, it would have like 30 tiny little drawings to help us cultivate and inspire confidence. And after a few years of putting out this calendar, it occurred to me that analog wall calendars weren't really a moneymaker. And there was like a cult, fervor for the people who loved this calendar. They asked for it every year, but it took so much time to change all the days, and it really didn't make a lot of money. So I decided to turn it into a coloring book so that it could exist, in a timeless way. And also so that people could engage the little drawings and the little prompts, and have it be a little bit more interactive. So that's what Yes, I Am is. It's the conversion of the calendar into this kind of massive coloring book.
It's interesting. A lot of the books, as you talk about them, seem to be aimed at obviously personal, individual empowerment.
Yes.
And, sort of offering up some type of defense, for lack of a better word, to the type of propaganda that you write about. But I'm interested to know your thoughts on this. But let's take the concept of betterarchy and framing it as, let's say, a grand narrative like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These grand narratives seem to be what the people like Biden, the Biden administration, and others, Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, and you name it, they seem to be very, very intent upon toppling over statues, canceling great authors, destroying cherished works of art, really tearing down these grand narratives that have been let's say, the pillars of Western civilization for a very long time. Western civilization being, let's say, the repository of all the best things about Western civilization over many centuries. How do we restore these grand narratives? Do you think, first of all, it's important to restore those grand narratives? I think I know what you'll say about that. But and if so, how do we do that?
Such a good question. It's hard given how much of our history they've tried to erase so far.
Right. Yeah.
I look back, like the reason I became a writer was because I read the book, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And,
Yeah.
I grew up in Los Angeles. So Los Angeles, very diverse, very progressive. But hearing the language used in that book was so heartbreaking to me. And it showed me the power of the written word and how much emotion the written word could cultivate. And the fact that they're trying to censor that book and just take it out of circulation is insane to me. So I think, one of the things is we have to restore complete, unfettered free speach.
Right.
It's so important. And we have to know where we came from so that we can honor how far we've come. And we can honor the spirit of humanity and how we actually are good. and like how much we've transcended. As a child of the 70s, like all of these narratives around racism and sexism, they don't land for me, because I grew up
Me
reading
neither.
Free to Be You
Yeah.
and Me and like loving Fred
Yeah.
Sanford and, The Cosby Show and all of those things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. One of the things that I'm inviting solutions for are what do we do about these generations that have been programmed with these ideas of separation and identity. And I'm still waiting, for, capital L life to show me how we're going to fix that.
Well, you could write a series of great books. That might help.
Well, one of the things that I would love to do, did you grow up with Schoolhouse Rock? Do you remember that series?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I feel like we need a new version of those with our real history, with, tying math into sacred geometry and, the power of language to program our reality and empowerment and confidence. I think one of the things that we're up against is the entertainment machine and how many of us are addicted to that. And then people like you and me who are trying so hard to wake up the world, like, it's kind of boring and didactic. Like we're two grown-ups talking into a screen and, it's great for us, but is it going to capture the minds of kids who want cartoons and colors and entertainment? So I think one place that I'm excited for us to go is to start creating more entertainment media that's fun and has catchy jingles and catchy slogans that can get the same traction that, the propagandists get with their nonsense. I think that would go a long way in helping us.
Yeah, I agree. And, what you say about freedom of speech really resonates with me. And one of the things that has been lost in our public discourse is, the idea that we can have conversations and we can risk giving offense to someone else. Just during the course of this hour, I've asked you questions and that maybe that you could have taken offense to, but you didn't. But we had a meaningful conversation because I risked offending you because I really wanted to know what you thought. And of course, this is something that's really being shut down in our public discourse. And we don't seem to have shows, like William F. Buckley used to have. We need to have more. I think we need to demonstrate to younger people and really to everyone, but especially younger people, that, we don't need safe spaces. We don't have to worry about being triggered. We can actually risk giving offense in order to have a meaningful conversation. We can talk about things that we disagree upon, but we can do it in a civil way, in a way that is harmonious. But we can learn from each other if we really respect each other and listen. So it seems to me that's part of what you're talking about in Betterarchy. But, we've come to the part of the show where we wrap up. Dani, I want to thank you so much for the time. This has been a really illuminating conversation. I've enjoyed it very much. On this show, we close with something called the reading list. Now, obviously, the cat's out of the bag. My selections are the 4 books that we've talked about that you have authored. But you get the last word here. And obviously, you're somebody who is very well read. Are there a book or two or some other resource, whether it's a website or something like that, that you would recommend to people who are listening to this or watching this that would maybe expand their understanding of some of the things we've been talking about today?
Absolutely. And what a great question. I'm a huge fan of Dr. David Hawkins. And so as much as I would love my books to be required reading for every human on the planet, I think Power versus Force, especially for where we're at right now as a culture, is a must read. Again, honoring everyone's free will, so I would never insist. But I think Dr. David Hawkins' entire body of work is so helpful in just helping us understand subtleties of violence and force. And a lot of it informs my work, especially my work on conflict languaging and just understanding how our language can shut people down. And if we're shut down, we're not going to be able to collaborate on solutions. And the last thing that I would like to say, if I can, when you ask me if I believe people are fundamentally good, the reason why you can risk offending me, I think, is because there's a part of you that knows I'm good. Right. And if we give people the generosity of trusting that they know that we're coming from the right place, and also the generosity of trusting that they have tools to manage their emotions and their triggers, and we give each other that, I think it's going to be easier to have these tougher conversations.
Interesting. Well, thank you again, Dani, for being with us, and thank you for your books. I enjoyed them very much. They're part of our reading list, and I strongly recommend them to our audience. As a last word, I noted that in one of your books, I believe it was Betterarchy, there was a foreword by Dr. David Martin. And if you could put in a word for me, I'd love to have him on this program, because he's said some things publicly about the connection between the COVID-19 vaccine conspiracy and our Prime Minister in Canada. And I'd love to have him come on the show to go more in depth with him on that topic. So let's consider that a last request, if you will.
Absolutely. I'm happy to shoot my friend David an email on your behalf.
All right. Thanks. And thank you so much for being our special guest today on Grey Matter. Best of luck with all that you do. I hope you sell lots of books, and that your podcast just explodes across the internet.
Thank you so much, Leighton. Thank you for having me. I love this conversation. Super grateful.
Thank you.